Hey everybody, my name is Jim Farmer. I'm the festival director of Out on Film, Atlanta's LGBTQ Film Festival. Welcome to a very special Beyond Film conversation as part of Sundance in Atlanta. We're going to be talking tonight about who owns our narrative, the ongoing issue of whether heterosexual actors should play LGBTQ roles. We have a terrific panel that I want to briefly introduce. I'll do it alphabetically. Fawzia Mirza is a Pakistani Canadian film and television actress, writer, producer, and comedian. She is known for her work such as web series Cam Kardashian, Brown Girl Problems, and the smash film Signature Move. Welcome, Fawzia.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Ryan Spahn is an actor and writer from whom Ryan Spahn is an actor-writer of films such as Nora Highland, and he's way more famous than you are. Brian co-created the digital series What's Your Emergency and will appear in the upcoming seasons of Modern Love and The Second Wave. Please welcome Ryan Spahn.
Thank you for having me. Hello.
Thank you. Doug Spearman is an actor, director, producer, writer, known for such work as Noah's Ark, Hot Guys with Guns, and From Zero to I Love You. His upcoming projects include Boy Culture and Langley Park. Please welcome Doug Spearman.
Nice to see you. Thanks for
joining us, Doug. Michael Urie is an American actor, presenter, director, and producer, best known for his portrayal of Mark St. James in the ABC dramedy television series Ugly Betty. He's also been seen on stage in Buyer and Seller, How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying, and Torch Song. He will next be seen in Todd Stevens' Swan Song. Please welcome Michael Urie.
Hey, thanks.
Thanks so much. And finally, we have Andria Wilson. From 2016 to 2020, Andria was the executive director of Inside Out, Canada's largest LGBTQ film festival. She led Inside Out through a period of transformation, growth that included establishing the world's only LGBTQ film financing forum and the launch of 2 film funds, Refocus, which distributes more than $50,000 annually to queer women, trans, and non-binary filmmakers, and the Out TV Documentary Fund. Please welcome Andria Wilson. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. You know, when I was growing up way back then in the dark ages, there really wasn't that much representation of visibility. I remember, you know, watching films like Cruising and, you know, Making Love, and then we sort of segue into the AIDS epidemic. So that's what I was growing up with. These days, we have a lot more options. We can have, you know, films in theaters, films that have happy endings, but it sort of seems like, this is just my theory, please elaborate. It seems like we take steps forward and then there are steps that go backwards. I think there's no denying that as much product as there is right now, we still have a huge problem with representation. Most of the films that we see are made by white men. We don't have a lot of BIPOC representation in many of these films, but also we still have the issue of heterosexual actors taking on LGBT roles, and which it's something that is very, very relevant right now, because there's at least 5 or 6 movies that have come out in the last 6 months that have gay roles played by straight actors. So I just wanted to take the temperature and talk to you all and talk to you about the climate. Ryan, what's your interpretation of how things are right
now? Well, I have a very I saw a quote recently that sort of inspired me to write a play that then was turned into a film about the subject matter. And the quote basically said that there's been, I think it was like 60 plus actors who were nominated for playing queer roles, who were all played by straight people who were nominated for Oscars for playing those roles. And only one person who was openly queer was nominated for playing a queer character, and that was Ian McKellen. And so I feel like there is something about that just on its face value is deeply problematic. And you can argue that everyone should be considered equal for any part, anybody, it's a fair game, the right person should be hired, but there is something about those kind of statistics that you can't deny, that there is just a deeply rooted problem in how people are cast and who's allowed in those rooms and what defines best person for a role and whose definition of best that is and what they're sort of equating as best and what gets value in a room that doesn't get value and who gets value and why and opportunity. And all of that, I think, is something that people just need to seriously take a look at, especially people who are in control of who is allowed in those rooms and why they're allowed in.
Okay. Fawzia, what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the baseline to me, like for me, it's very contextual. And I say that kind of sort of thinking in this very also outside of spaces that where it's as safe for gay people to gay actors play gay roles. Actually, let me back up. I think that number one, it is contextual, but like to me, there's no excuse for like you writing a trans role and then you're like, but what about this guy in a dress? And it's like, no, if there's a trans role, I deeply believe that there's no reason that anyone other than a trans actor should play the part. The reason I sort of sounded like I was hedging is that I'm currently working on I'm co-writing a film that is set in 4 cities in India and with a queer director writer. And it's much harder to get queer actors to play those roles because just of the state of being queer in India. It was being queer was only decriminalized in the last 2 years. At the government level, it's not necessarily safe for someone to be like, if you say, well, my movie has all gay actors, it may not be safe for those people to actually continue living there. It's easy as outsiders to come in, but to stay there, it's different. So, I mean, I think that, that's a context that I've been thinking a lot about. I also think if the show or the movie or the role is about like this beautiful gay story and it's about like gay love, especially if you have the funding and you have the acclaim and you have all the power, and I do want to say like The Prom is an example of that where I don't know. I know how hard it is to make. I know it's impossible to make these big budget studio films. And I wonder like, what were the steps? Like, why is it that this story of of a gay coming out, embracing who you are, our struggle, like why was that not cast with like a gay actor who can sing? I mean, there's plenty of gays who can sing, like a white gay man who can sing in Hollywood. Like, I wonder about that. And so then I'm like, I know there's probably money and this and attachments and friendship, and the optics of that don't feel as good when you think what we can do right now, our potential. So, I do think sometimes that the context can matter. And that's one of them. Like, why not?
Sure.
I hope that was really eloquent the way I said that.
Oh, it's very eloquent, yes.
Yeah, that's what I was going for.
Okay. Doug.
Ooh, complicated question. But what I really enjoyed listening to Ryan and Fawzia is that I think they're both right. I mean, like you were talking about like the representation, and I sort of bounce between TV and film, but when I was growing up, because I think I'm older than everybody combined on this Zoom call, I mean, like I had 2 representations of gay men when I was growing up, and it was Charles Nelson Riley and Paul Lynde. Do you know what I mean? So like we got 2, and then by the time I got to high school or junior high school, they started, the roles started expanding, and God loved Billy Crystal and Soap because he like gave me a career path. I think everything that everybody's, Matt Boomer can't do every part. Do you know, like, because Matt Boomer, and there's a British actor, but if you're just going to talk about American leading men, Matt Boomer is the only, Matt Boomer and Zachary Quinto are 2 of the most recognized out gay actors. I think it has a lot to do with money. I think a lot of this has to do with money because the money you put into a project goes usually in above the line salaries, and that's acting talent, and you know, those people command salaries because they've got a reputation and they've got a following. You know what I mean? I think we're getting better all the time, and I think what we have to really address is homophobia.
Yeah.
Because until you really address homophobia, both in the culture, in the American culture, and also within the studio Hollywood world, and realize that we are valuable people, then we're going to keep having this conversation. Because a lot of what drives Hollywood isn't about creativity, it's about who's going to put the butts in the seats. And that's why, you know, capes and tights and, you know, Australian actors pretending to not be Australian actors are ruling our world. It's just like, you know, like I was just reading an article, just bear with me here. If you look at like the best, most critically and financially acclaimed movies with Black male leads, those aren't American actors. They're African and British actors. Do you know what I mean? It's the same thing. So why can't you hire a Black actor to do that, and a Black American actor to play freaking Martin Luther King? Do you know what I mean? So why we do the same thing? We look at these groups of people, whether it's Black, whether it's queer, whatever it is, and we look at these marginalized communities and think, how can they look at it and how can we twist it to our advantage? We have to keep making our own movies, and we have to build consensus and audiences. That's the only way any of this stuff is going to get solved. And we have to constantly prove ourselves to them that we are not only culturally and creatively viable, but economically viable. Personally, I still think if you can, I completely 100% agree that trans roles need to go to trans actors. Do you know what I mean? Because I think that door has just been too narrow and hasn't opened enough for them. In terms of gay men or queer men or queer women always having to play a part that's queer, I don't necessarily think that's true. But I think more and more and more of those roles have to be written. I mean, there was an article in Variety this week that said that we are 60% less queer representation on television than there was a year ago. 60%. That's a big freaking deal.
Yes. Andria.
I have so much to say. There's so much there. I think it's really interesting, Ryan, what you were saying about the awards. And I think, you know, there's that great section in the documentary Disclosure that I'm always harping on people to watch, which is available on Netflix, directed by Sam Feder, where Jen Richards talks about the correlation that she sees between the murders of trans women and cis men being awarded and celebrated for playing trans women, which, you know, perpetuates this idea that it's a man pretending, which is so dangerous. And you know, we've seen so many examples of that, but I think what's so interesting about that truth of like celebrating actors for playing gay characters is that so many of those gay characters, trans characters, queer characters are defined by like horrendous trauma. And so it's also the kind of narratives that we're constructing and continuing to construct and support, right, of queer and trans people. And so if, you know, an actor is being celebrated because they played this character that was just going through the absolute worst abuse imaginable, and that's a queer or trans person, like perhaps there's something we should really, you know, be looking at and finding ways in to narratives that are not just about presenting an acting challenge of, you know, going to the deepest depths of you know, the worst parts of humanity. So I think there's a piece there. And of course, we see and have seen with, you know, folks like people on this panel and, you know, creators, writer, directors that are queer, that are trans, that are getting access to, you know, space where they're defining those narratives. We're seeing those whole processes shift. Like I love talking to queer writer directors around their involvement in the casting process. And they're always, I swear, more involved and like more intense about it than, you know, other cis straight directors. There's something incredibly personal when you're doing this work, and when you're, you know, when you are representing your community through your work. And so I think that is part solution, but we still have to really shake up the mechanisms by which, you know, projects are financed. Because, you know, if your protagonist is a queer character, you have to attach someone in many cases that is, you know, a known quantity, so that you can get that money flowing. And you know, I feel really optimistic. I remember, when was the Scarlett Johansson casting debacle? Was it 2 years ago now? At that
so, yeah.
moment, there maybe, yeah. So it's been a minute, and I remember in that there were so many panels and conversations about that at that time. And I remember one where someone said, well, we just don't have a bankable trans star now. We don't have one. You know, there's no one who's bankable that you can attach to a project that you can get financed. Cut to 2021, I can actually list like 5 trans actors that can actually get money flowing now. So like we are on the path, but it's not going to happen overnight, because the system protects itself, and the system doesn't want it to happen overnight. So like it was advocacy that like raised the flag and made that impact that we have felt so far, and like that advocacy has to continue to get us to, you know, a place where this conversation, I hope, someday just feels totally irrelevant.
Exactly. And Michael.
No fair. No fair going last. Everyone said such really incredible, beautiful things, and I agree with everybody on this panel. The first thing I thought was, you know, I went to drama school to be, you know, an actor. I didn't go to drama school to be a gay actor, and I certainly didn't get out of school thinking I'll just play gay roles. I wanted to play lots and lots of kinds of roles, straight roles, all kinds of roles. So you know, I get, and the first thing that comes back at me when I say queer actors should play queer roles, queer actors should represent themselves, is, well, don't you want to play straight characters? And I mean, of course, the answer is, of course I do. Of course, I want to play all kinds of things. And if that were happening, if I, you know, if I were, you know, playing even as many straight characters as queer characters, I might feel differently. I might feel that the pendulum was, you know, in a different place. But the truth is, that's not. It's just not the way it works in show business. Like you know, you're pounding the pavement to get work, and then the more work you get, the more you're expected to talk about the work, and the more you talk about the work, the more you're expected to talk about your personal life, and you just can't not talk about, you know, your personal life. The first time I had a job that was high profile, everyone wanted to know my business immediately. And I had to, you know, make a choice right then. And I was told, don't tell people you're gay. Don't, you know, do not come out, or you won't get another job. This will be your last job. And in fact, even as of the last few years, I've been told, you've got to stop playing so many gay roles. You've got to ease off those characters. But the truth is, if I said, okay, this is the last one, or if I said that was the last one, then I wouldn't work. I wouldn't be on this panel. I wouldn't get opportunities at all if I wasn't open to that. So it is complicated. And, you know, so yeah, I want the pendulum to swing. But on the other hand, I agree with Fawzia that if a character's problem is rooted in their queerness, and I don't mean that it's necessarily like a coming out story, but like a love story, you know, or whatever. If the character's like core conflict deals with their queerness, whether it's falling in love or, you know, I mean, even the prom, you know, like that character in the prom, his core issue is his core conflict in that movie is surrounding his queerness. And knowing very, very, you know, famously that James Corden is not a queer person, but watching him like shed all these tears about being queer in that movie and about his mother not accepting him and all that stuff, you can't help but think those aren't real. That's not real. They might be real tears. He might be, you know, but he's definitely substituting something else in there to make it work. And so immediately you're taken out of it when, and if it was a queer musical theater, a white queer musical theater actor, of which there are squillions, then you would get truth. You would get like an actual, you know, an actual example of what a queer person's going through. So so I agree. And then I'm just going around explaining where I agreed with the other panelists, but I am a co-producer of a queer theater festival. And that's happened. Well, we've done it 2 years now, and we're going to do it again. Last year it was on all digitally, but we do lots of queer plays, and we cast as many queer people as we can. Occasionally we will have to cast straight cis allies in roles, just based on, you know, other you know, trying to be authentic in other ways. Like this past year we did 2 plays that were entirely Middle Eastern characters, and we found as many queer Middle Eastern actors as we could, but eventually we did hit a wall, and we had to find some who weren't. But it is amazing to me, and a lot of these plays are plays that are like in development, and you know, a writer wants it to move forward, or there's a producer attached that wants to, you know, or the director's like, well, maybe this reading can be a stepping stone, so we want to cast people that might help us get to the next level or whatever. And you would not believe how many things Matt Bomer is right for when you are casting. He can play anything, apparently. And I think he's a terrific actor, and I'm thrilled that he's out there, and I'm thrilled that he's one of the like out gay actors who does get cast in straight roles. But when it comes to getting your project off the ground, it is shocking what people will how people will acquiesce to to traits and capabilities and you know, like, I mean, I've seen people say, what about Matt Bomer? I mean, you know, everybody knows what Matt Bomer looks like. He's a dashing, handsome, strapping. He's you know, he's a very attractive leading man looking guy. And I have seen people try to wedge him into character roles, into old people, into teenagers. It's amazing. It's miraculous. And it's sad because, you know, like, there's so many other actors. And that was part of the reason we started the Pride Plays to begin with, because there's Matt Bomer, there's Zach Quinto, and then there's, you know, like, there's some guys from TV.
The rest of us.
What? What'd you say?
The rest of us.
And then there's the rest of us. And so there's this giant chasm between the people who can get projects made and then people who can't get in the door. And we were hoping that Pride Plays, this festival, could be a step for people. And it's a constant struggle to make sure that we're bringing along anyone we can. And this is for a festival. This is not, you know, these are people are getting paid $200 to you know, work on a play for a few days. It's not, these aren't, you know, we're not trying to we're not giving anybody a golden ticket, but it's like this constant struggle of wanting to move the needle forward and wanting and still having to play the game. So having to say, yeah, okay, Matt Bomer will get that green lit. But he, you know, there are 10 other actors I can think of who would be better for it. So it's challenging and complicated, but the authenticity, to me, it always goes back to the authenticity that Fawzia was talking about. Like that's why, I mean, all of the kinds of movies that we're talking about that are playing on these festivals, that's the kind of stuff that that's really rising to the top. And when we reward these straight cis actors, it's really because we can see the strings, we see their work, not because they're necessarily better. It's because and like those 62 roles for LGBTQ characters that were played by straight cis actors, if they had been played by queer actors, would we have even heard about them? Like, would they have gotten the attention because they would have seemed easy? I mean, would it have seemed like, why do we, I'm going off now, but why don't we give Jesse Tyler Ferguson an Emmy on Modern Family for playing something that's probably a lot closer to who he is, instead of Eric Stone Street, who is a very funny heterosexual actor who is camping it up and doing a lot more than his normal personality? Why is that better? Why is that a more award-worthy thing? Anyway, I'll step down.
Doug, you mentioned homophobia. I mean, how much homophobia is there still in the industry, you think?
I'm going to say something that very few people, that I've never said pretty much in public before. When I did Noah's Ark, I had already been an actor since I was 7. And I had been a gay man living in West Hollywood, in Hollywood, California for 20 years at that point. And all you had to do was Google me to know that I was gay. But when we did the first season of Noah's Ark, we had public relations training, and they told me to go back in the closet. And and I was like, we're on a gay network, and we're a gay TV show, and I can't go back. Do you know what I mean? I can't go back. And they couched it under the producers couched it under the ideas of like create a mystery. I'm like, well, there's no mystery here with me. I mean, there's a distance between me and the character that I play, but there's no mystery about me playing a gay man, and because I am an openly gay man. And in terms of what that did for me in the industry, I sometimes joke that Chance, which was the character, shot my acting career in the head for 10 years. Like, I couldn't get hired for 10 years. And a lot of it was because of the show that I'd been on, because I was an openly gay actor. I mean, I was on, panels and magazines and, just doing all the stuff that you do when, like you're riding that particular wave. So, I mean, I had gay agents tell me not to play gay. Do you know what I mean? And who like, I had interviews at really big agencies with gay agents who had no need to be in the closet, but they were saying to me like, well, you did that show. Well, what do you expect us to do with you? And it wasn't until both, I think, years of like just theater and doing and sticking to my art, and then deciding that I wanted to be the agent of my own destiny, which is why I started writing and directing films of my own. I mean, Ryan and I did a fantastic play in Scotland together. That's how we met. And in that interim period, but I had to take control of my destiny. And it's only been because of the changes in society, because same-sex marriage became is a thing, because there are more representations of who we are in our entirety out there, that like my acting career just picked up like 4 years ago. And now I'm reading for I am starting to read for the romantic leads, straight romantic leads, which I never thought I would be able to do. I mean, like, if they're looking at my Instagram, they know what's going on. Do you know what I mean? But there has definitely been a fundamental switch, but it was a dark, dark period. And to have gay people in the industry tell me not to be who I am. And I also lost roles. And I'll tell you in particular, I lost a part on Girlfriends years ago because I wasn't gay enough, because I wasn't what they wanted gay to be, a Black gay man to be. Yeah, they wanted me to be, and the guy that got it was a straight guy. And I knew it. I saw his audition. I was in the, I was in the lobby with him. And, I actually had to offer to, like I had gay directors in theater tell me, go back to my agent and say, well, Doug can just be himself because he's playing this guy wrong. And they're like, that is Doug. And then I had, I actually in front of a very famous casting director who told me I wasn't gay in the office. And I asked her point blank, who do I have to perform a certain oral act on in order to prove it to you? Do you know what I mean? Like, I was so frustrated. It's because what gay or queer or lesbian or whatever the label is that Hollywood is looking for, sometimes they want it to be in a very narrow box and they can't hold the entirety of who we are as three-dimensional individuals. Do you know what I mean? So sure. It has started to change, and hopefully it's changing from the management up. But after a while, I just got tired of playing the game, and I'm like, screw this, I'm going to make my own movies. And I'm going to make it with people make the best film I can make, and then just keep rising up. It's still there. I think there's less of it, but it's definitely still there.
Yeah. Fawzia, what kind of homophobia have you experienced?
Oh my God, we're going to talk about my trauma. Oh my gosh.
Sorry.
Jim, okay, Atlanta, bringing it in. I mean, I guess I relate. I mean, not I guess. I do relate to the idea of being gay enough, right? Like, well, as a queer Muslim Pakistani, person, I've gone in for roles for all of the things, and definitely been told, well, you're not gay enough. That's not really what Muslim, because I'm not acting as much now. I'm focusing more on writing and directing, but like, as an actor, which is why I started writing, because as an actor, I was like, okay, none of these stories represent my experience at all, for one of my identities, much less all of them. So I was definitely like, they were like, well, Muslim, we want somebody who wears, the thing, and I'm like, well, I wear a hat, so that wasn't right. And then, as a lesbian, like, I don't know, I think I'm pretty queer, but maybe not in the right way. I don't know, maybe I didn't wear the right pants. Like, there was like, need more pockets, something. Or, a woman, like, what does a woman look like? What is femininity look like? What is the performance of femininity? I clearly didn't have that. I'm wearing this denim shirt. So, that's definitely something that we have to move past. And I do think that, the way I think about this is very intersectional, because it just is how I exist. And for me, embracing my queerness was never just about embracing queerness alone. It was also what it meant to be a queer brown woman, a queer Muslim woman, a queer brown Muslim woman. What did it mean in all of these contexts? And so when I think of like casting, I do think of all of the intersections. And I think there are choices that get made in all of those spaces. I mean, of course there's homophobia. I think there's homophobia constantly. There's also racism. There's also anti-Muslimness. There's anti-Blackness. There's anti-Muslimness. There's homophobia. There's for sure sexism. Andria may not talk about this a lot, but she was an actor once, and can talk about that hustle of like how maybe I've outed her as an actor, but it's fine. I can say that we're married, so it's fine. Anyway, we're a couple. Anyway, that's not what this panel is about. So the point is yeah, we live, and I've been really, I talk about this a lot, and I've been absorbing it a lot, because I think it helps us do our job with more feeling less in anxiety all the time about the industry. The industry, as Andrea said, it's a system. It is not designed for us. and it's not designed for us. The more intersectional hats that we wear, and the further, you know, we've been marginalized by it, and the and it's not, and therefore we sort of have to, I think, what I see as my job sometimes, if I have any bit of power, how can I wield it better than it has been wielded before? And I'm talking about like a tiny short film. So like I shot a short film here in Toronto. So I was like, okay, how can I work better and harder to, like, you know, make this project and still like cast the best people and cast like queer people and cast, you know, have the crew, like make sure all my crew department heads are doing, I mean, I'm talking about like a $15,000 movie, right? But that is kind of the change we can see. And that, I mean, you talk to like 18-year-olds now and they're just like, we're great. You know, we don't have those issues you had. And I'm like, yeah, you don't. I need to hire you because everyone can learn from your strength in a way that was different, let's say 20 years ago. I don't even remember the question anymore. But the thing is there's so much homophobia and all the phobias, you know, it's not just one thing. And I think sometimes it's a mistake to think it's just the one thing. And I don't say that to be like, we should never be pitting trauma or pain. Like that's when that's the wrong thing. And I think that when we really reflect on how the system is abusing its power and hurting so many people and has hurt so many people, and how all of our actions can help our communities as a whole beyond just queer and trans and non-binary community, how we can help, like, you know, Black folks and brown folks and indigenous folks and all of those then I think we're thinking differently. And if we use that approach with everything, not just in our business, we can do better and we will create better.
Okay. Ryan, in your film Nora Highland, you talk about some of the homophobia that you faced in your career. There's one particular segment I watched the film and I adore the film, but there's a sequence where two friends are talking and an actress talking to a director who's getting her big break on Broadway, and there's a role for a gay actor, and the producer of the project doesn't want the gay actor to play the gay role. I mean, how defeating and how horrible is it for any of you when you realize that an openly gay director or an openly gay producer doesn't want to hire a gay person for a gay role? And we've sort of talked about this before, but how can you talk about some of your experiences?
Sure. Yeah. So in the movie, there's that is based on a real situation that happened where an openly gay actor was not able to be seen for a role because the owner of the estate of the play being revived didn't want an openly gay person playing this gay role, because in the first 10 or 15 minutes of the play, the character's supposed to be seen as someone who is straight. And I think what that sort of pins on is how much what is considered attractive, the definition of sex appeal, or what people find strong, or I hate talking about it in that context, but I think it's such a huge part of casting is people want people in roles that they have some sort of excitement or flutter about when they watch them. And I think there's a perception that I'm speaking as a cis gay male, is they're less attractive than straight cis men, that there's something about the masculine form of a straight man that people can all get behind, that a whole room can get behind. And I think because of that, it affects who gets roles and why, and sort of why, like a Matt Bomer, who can pass, if you will, as something, a lot of people can get behind that, whereas somebody who is a little bit not as passable, if you will, is going to have a hard time. And I think sort of what Doug was saying, that you know, related to a movie, say like Selma, where it's this British actor is playing this role. I think I've had a lot of times in auditions, I'm also an actor, and so when I've gone to an audition, I've had casting directors or directors say things to me that's clearly like, you relate, the note is, we can see that you relate to this role, and therefore the danger or the fun has now gone away because you've dropped into a place that's too like serious. You're not light with it, you're not effervescent, you're not throwing it away, you're not able to light up the room in the way that somebody who has no relatability to the trauma that's being introduced or the situation that's being introduced can come in and sort of vibrantly carry a room, and therefore wins everyone in the room. And in the end, the person who was deeply rooted and connected to it ultimately probably would have landed a better performance. But in the context of an audition or those first couple of meetings, it's hitting them so personally that it is not as attractive to a person who is witnessing it for the first time. And I think that something about that we have got to figure out, because you are losing all. I think of often of the show Pose, and I remember thinking when that show first started, the actors, you could see them getting better episode after episode after episode because they were given this opportunity, and then by the end of the first season, they're just extraordinary. In season 2, it's like everyone is so good, and it's because they were these people who were not given the opportunities that many other people are given, were able to grow before our eyes in a way that proves, if you just step away from the control of what you think is what feels good to you when you're in a powerful position of decision making, and actually allow people in the room who can really deeply relate to a story that's being told, you're just going to be blown away by what people can do.
Okay. Andria, I wanted to ask you a little bit, as someone who coordinates a film festival, what do you think is our obligation in presenting films to our audiences?
Yeah, I think there's an incredible amount of responsibility that all exhibitors hold to their audiences and to the artists that they work with. You know, exhibition is a gate. It's not like the gate, but it's a gate, right? And so you have to, if you're keeping any gate, you have to be conscious of, you know, the people that are coming through on both sides. And I think that you know, it was only in 2017 when I was at Inside Out that we said publicly, we will not exhibit work where cis actors are playing trans characters. And at that time, other festivals were not so eager to hop on that kind of hard line. But it was incredibly important to us because we had seen the harm in our communities. And, you know, that year in Toronto, you know, an unbelievable amount of trans women had been killed. And just the idea that we could be in any way contributing to that, you know, that felt like such an easy decision. And you know, I think the relationship that you have with your community and you have with your audience, you know, I hear a lot from people, you know, like, well, our audiences aren't ready for that kind of content, or they're not, you know, they only like this, or, you know, they only like this. It's like, well, if we're not pushing at that, if we're not wanting to show them more, if we're not wanting to expand the world of the people that we show work to, then like, what are we doing? You know, like just pressing the same play on the same thing over and over and over again. Like, that's not going to advance our industry. That's not going to grow our artists. That's not going to give them opportunities. And I think, you know, it's unfortunate that so many of the people that I hear who feel this way about their responsibility, of course, are themselves from marginalized communities, right? Like when the GLAAD TV report came out recently, and, you know, almost 100% of the queer and trans characters on television are in shows by 4 showrunners, 3 of whom are gay themselves: Lena Waithe, Ryan Murphy, and Greg Berlanti, and then Shonda Rhimes, who, you know, we can all agree has changed a lot of lives. And like, that's mind-boggling that that few people are responsible for like every, you know, queer character on, you know, network or a lot of cable that we see right now. And, you know, I can't help but think that those people feel that way about their responsibility as creators because of their own experiences. You know, and as they, my hope, I suppose, is that that attitude becomes more pervasive and everyone starts to feel more of a, you know, a sense of their social responsibility, if they have power in a space, but also just that, you know, we're able to decolonize a lot of these practices and systems that we have, you know, that feed all of these different pipelines. I think the auditioning one is a huge conversation for sure. And yeah, anyway, that's, we can just talk about that offline, but I really hope that that attitude becomes more pervasive, and that, you know, through these kinds of conversations we can reach, you know, our colleagues honestly and say, like, you know, our responsibility goes much deeper than just, you know, simply entertainment. It really, we have to be a part of a movement.
And I think that you know, to go off of that as part of a movement, it's sort of like, you know, I do take sort of embracing who I am. I don't feel boxed in by embracing all my identities. Like, I always write a queer brown protagonist. Like, that's why, what else would I want to write? And I say that I love it. You know, of course I want to write and do write other things, but that I want others in the world to feel seen. And I have to keep writing more and more and more, because maybe one of those things will get made. Right? Like, we know the odds, we know the numbers, but bringing it back to social justice, just thinking about these systems, like, and reflecting on what you said, Michael, about like, do I, as a gay man, want to play straight roles? Yes. And it's like, it's not as easy as, well, if I want to play this, they should get to play this, because it's really about power and like, who has the power in these dynamics. And if, like, you know, have, you know, cis white straight men been hurt by white gay men playing those? No, but the reverse is definitely true. And I think we can apply that rule across the board. You know, have trans men and women been hurt and murdered by cis men and women playing yes, unequivocally. And I think that is
not by those actors, Fawzia.
Right, not yet.
They weren't murdered by the actors.
Not right.
But yeah,
you know what? Nope.
Nobody knows.
Thank you.
Yeah, Michael, I wanted to ask you a question. It's sort of the same, sort of this along the same line as what I asked Andria. What are some things that you want to see LGBTQ festivals do, and what are some things you don't want to see any more LGBT festivals do?
Well, you know, I think LGBTQ festivals are already doing so much more than, you know, anybody else in terms of like queer representation. Obviously, they're focused on, you know, they're focused on telling queer stories, and, you know, what Andria said about actually making a policy that we weren't going to show movies where cis people played trans people. I mean, that is the kind of step, that's the kind of leadership that has to happen. And, you know, and you know, what Fawzia said about when you are in a position of leadership, making the decisions that, like, you know, and in my tiny little position of leadership in our queer festival, doing everything we can to have it populated with queer people, and certainly having the roles that are you know, intended for queer people played by those, you know, accurate representations. But I think, I think you mentioned Billy Crystal earlier. Like when I think about, these years and years of straight allyship, and I think straight allyship was so important. Certainly when queer people weren't out, when it was dangerous for queer people to come out, when it was a career killer, and there were still queer roles to be played, and our straight allies were playing them. I think that was really, extremely important. But a couple of years ago, the Paley Festival, the Paley Festival is this television archive, and they sort of archive all of television, and they do great panels, and they do a lot of really cool work, and it's a great place to do research and stuff like that. And they did this big LGBTQ gala, retrospective gala, and I was invited because I played a queer character on a major television show, and they were honoring, I think they honored Don Lemon was there honoring a sports broadcast, queer sports something or other, and then they had Jesse Tyler Ferguson and Deborah Messing gave an award to new queer television show. There was like queer, some interesting, cool queer things happening. And then the last award, it was coming up on the last award. And we were like, oh my gosh, I wonder who's here. I wonder who's here. Who's it gonna be? And then they said, please welcome to the stage to present our final award, Judith Light. And I love Judith Light. What better queer ally is there than Judith Light? And then she started to describe, this honoree burst onto the scene, yada, yada, yada. And you start to realize who it is. And it was Billy Crystal. And Billy Crystal was like early queer television, and certainly like, like a sea change, or certainly like an early, but then he's the guy who gets the last award of the night, when there have been so many incredible, actually queer people on TV, who have and he got up and he made a speech about how it could have killed his career, and everyone said how brave he was, and everyone told him not to do it, and yes, he made a really lovely speech as an ally, but it made me think, wow, we don't have any, we don't get our own keynote address. We don't even get, like, you couldn't get any queer actor to have the last word of the night. It's going to be Billy Crystal. And yes, you can't do a retrospective of queer representation on TV and not talk about Soap, because it was such a moment. But it felt like, and it reminded me, I was when I was on Ugly Betty, it was honored by the Human Rights Campaign, and we went, and Rebecca Romaine and I accepted. Rebecca Romaine, who was playing a trans woman on the show, a cis woman playing a trans woman. This is a different time, but we accepted the award. And different time. I hear myself say that, and I think, fuck myself. But yeah, it was. And she was, and she's great. I love her, but obviously that was a terrible mistake. And anyway, I was the only gay person on stage at the HRC. Nancy Pelosi, great. Matthew Broderick, okay. Rebecca Romaine, and me. And it was the Human Rights Campaign, celebrating representation in the arts. And there were no queer people there. And this is like a while ago. So I get it. I get it. I get that we're like still moving forward, but the Paley thing was not that long ago. And I guess if I were to ask film festivals to not do something and to do something, it would be, please no longer reward straight allyship, and please, celebrate our queer artists for being artists, and not just for, not just their bravery. Let's let it be about the art and not about individual bravery.
advice taken. This is a topic that we could talk about for hours and hours. We have about 5 more minutes. I guess the final question for any of you, how do we get to the point, whether it's 5 years from now, 10 years from now, where we have an ammonite, where we have a supernova, where we have the world to come, Falling, The Prom, with gay actors actually playing the gay roles? How do we get to that point?
Just very quickly, I will say, like, supporting emerging creatives that are casting exceptional queer actors in their work at the web series, short film, small first feature at that level, and shaking up the idea of a star system in a way so that we're, like what I said earlier about 3 years ago, people being like, well, there's no bankable trans actors. And now, because of the work done by shows like Pose, there are. Like, we have to do that across the board, and it doesn't happen. The system's not going to let it happen organically. We have to make it happen by really finding avenues to champion these projects and these creatives so that we're creating our own star system. And we have those exceptional talents that are at that level in a few years.
Anyone else?
That's one tiny piece. That's not the whole
Well,
solution.
I completely agree with Andria, but the other thing, and this is, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I wish some of the actors that do have major careers and that would be considered stars by anybody's metrics would actually come out. You know what I mean? I think there are a lot of people that are still operating under a false flag, and I think and the people on this panel are exceptionally brave and exceptionally I admire everybody on this panel so much, because we're the people, like, not trying to hide or blend in and still make it. And there are people, and hopefully we're proving, and that shows like Pose and all the movies with queer actors actually in them are showing the world that it's okay to be exactly who you are and be honest about who you are, and let the world see you for who you are and take responsibility for that.
I mean, I feel like I think everyone's path to coming out kind of is what it is, and boy, was mine a mess. It seems like super easy for me now, but it was not. I write about it constantly. But I do think also, like, positions of power, we need those folks who are advocates, not just on the side of creation, but on the side of the green lighting and the gatekeeping. So one of the things that I often tell people is, like, and I often say this to, like, Muslim space or South Asian space. It's like, maybe not all the kids have to be, they don't have to be doctors or lawyers or engineers. Maybe they could be like the executives, they own Warner Media. You know what I mean? Like that, being in that position where suddenly your mindset of, because of the way you were raised, even though you're still working with this system, you are bringing in your own set of values and your own experiences and your brownness or your indigenousness or your blackness or your Muslimness or your, gayness or queerness or transness. I mean, that just matters. And I think like looking at politics is a great example. As much as, Hollywood thinks it isn't the government, it is a system that, does struggle and has some of the same problems. But, like, you look at the problems that the Squad has, like 5 women, of color struggle. They don't go a day without death threats, right? And that's just being a woman in the American political system. And so I think, but what they have done, just being, speaking out and sort of being like, okay, well, I guess we'll go work in the system that writes the laws and decides about the laws and lawmaking, that is impacting all of us as a collective. So I do think being on the other side is really important as well.
Okay. Fawzia, Ryan, Doug, Michael, Andria, Thank you so much for being part of this panel. Thanks for an amazing discussion. And thank you all for watching this segment of Beyond Film for Sundance in Atlanta. Thanks.